How many domestic terrorism arrests were effectuated in 2019?
So in 2019, we had 107 domestic terrorism arrests, and we had, I think, 121, give or take, international terrorism arrests.
And so in terms of international terrorism, there were more international terrorism arrests than domestic terrorism?
Yes, they're pretty close in number, but,
pretty close.
But yes.
How does that compare to the previous year?
The previous year was both hovering around 100 arrests, both of the prior year as well. I will say on the international terrorism side, in terms of number of investigations that we have ongoing, we have both the homegrown violent extremists, which are these people here inspired by various parts of the jihadist movement. We have about 1,000, give or take, investigations of that sort. But then that's not counting the foreign terrorist organizations or directed, structured international terrorism organizations, which probably have about another 1,000 or so of those. So while domestic terrorism is absolutely something that is very much top of mind, and we at the FBI recently elevated to be a national threat priority along with HVEs and ISIS, international terrorism is very much alive and well and something we need to stay focused on too.
I think that's correct. I think we talk a lot about domestic terrorism being on the rise, but I don't think we can let our eyes off the ball of foreign terrorist organizations and international terrorism. I introduced a bill with some colleagues to, you have a domestic terrorism definition that was created after 9/11. Congress passed, laws pertaining to terrorism, and both it was international terrorism and domestic terrorism. International terrorism had charges associated with it. Domestic terrorism did not. The FBI opens cases of domestic terrorism and international terrorism. However, the U.S. attorneys, and I was one of them, cannot charge a domestic terrorism case. There's no specific charge related to that. I introduced that bill working with the FBI, and it was endorsed by the FBI Association. Do you have any comments on that bill and what value that would give to the FBI and U.S. attorneys?
Well, I think as I had mentioned in response to a different question, certainly we can always use more tools. As you say, and as you experienced firsthand in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we don't have a domestic terrorism crime as such. What you probably also saw and probably practiced while you were in the U.S. Attorney's Office is our folks at the FBI, just like the AUSAs they work with, don't give up. And so they find workarounds. And we've been very good at using everything else in Title 18, including creative things like, most recently, we used the federal rioting statute to go after some of the terrorism that occurred in connection with Charlottesville, for example, and the Rise Above movement people there. And we also work with our state and local authorities, and especially in places like Texas. We've had some very successful work with state and local law enforcement, and you can get some pretty good hits as some state and local charges.
Yeah, and the state charge has death penalty. But I think, Mr. Chairman, in closing, whether it was Austin bombers, which is clearly terrorism, to El Paso, to Odessa, I think this is something we should take a look at. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank